When it comes to those all-important races, it can sometimes be hit and miss as to whether we have a good day, a great day, or an absolute stinker. So today I want to share with you some of my favourite race tips that have massively helped me over the years. So welcome back to another video. My name's Andy, the Forest of Dean runner, and this is all about race day tips. I want you guys to be able to smash your upcoming races, and for me, having raced now for over 8 years, there's been things that I've been implementing over time that have really helped me fine-tune and get that balance of good to poor races where it used to be around 50-50, more up to sort of like 80-20, where most of the time now I'm having much better, higher quality races. So without further ado, we're going to dive in, talk preparation and talk race day tips and share all of it with you guys. If you're excited for today's video, make sure you give it a like, share it with your friends, and of course subscribe to the channel for weekly running content. Let's dive in to the preparation. So there's two things I want to mention in this preparation phase. The first thing is all about booking tune-up races. I talk about this quite a lot, but I think if you're training for shorter distance events, this is really important to do. Nothing can simulate race day in training. You can go out and train at sort of goal race pace and practice going off at race pace for a short period of time, like a kilometre at race pace, whatever it might be, but you can't replicate the adrenaline, the race nerves, that feeling when you're stood on the start line. So if you book up tune-up races, that are basically races that aren't goal races, let's call the goal races A goal races, you can get some B and C goal races which are just for fun, or just to kind of experiment with race kit, race nutrition, race fueling, and get that buzz of being on the start line. And the second thing, as I just alluded to then, it's all about experimenting with everything you can imagine on these tune-up races. So for me, over the years, what I've done is I've experimented with a whole host of kit, shoes, and nutrition. Effectively, those are the three things that you need to be comfortable with on race day. Kit and shoes are important, but probably not as important as nutrition, because you think to yourself, you can deal with a bit of a blister throughout a race and get to the end of a race and go, that was really frustrating, I won't be using those shoes again. And kit, it might chafe, it might rub, but it's not the end of the world. But nutrition can absolutely be the end of a race before it's even started. If you rock up with a bad stomach, or if anything's gone wrong at eating that hasn't settled properly, it can be a disaster, and it can really completely wipe out your race from the start. So using these tune-up races to experiment and find out what works for you is really, really key. I've experimented over the years, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But in terms of, for me, whether it's a morning or evening race, over those tune-up races, over the years, I've managed to dial in pretty much what works for me and keeps my stomach settled. And tip number 3, I know I said later in the video, but later is now, nutrition. Let's talk about this one first as we work through. So with nutrition and talking about experimenting within tune-up races, this is then where we come to put it all into practice come race day. So for me, what I've learned with these tune-up races and experimenting with nutrition is you blend what has worked and what hasn't worked. So you kind of, over the years and over the races, you kind of tick and cross what type of foods have settled for you, what don't. I know a lot of people that can rock up and eat a banana within half an hour of the start of a race and be absolutely fine. For me, that would be game over from the start. There's a lot of things that I can't do that others can do, and there's a lot of things that I can do that others can't do. And I guess it just comes down to the fact that we're all individual and our stomachs and bodies all work in different ways. So for me, blending all the food that worked really well has really, really helped. For me, it's avoiding sort of fibrous foods within 48 hours of a race. And then of course, for me, if it's an evening race, like I've recently just had, then I tend to eat quite heavy in the morning up until lunchtime, and then I eat very, very light. I know a lot of people eat regularly throughout the day to keep energy levels up. I understand that. That just doesn't work for my stomach. I find that if I eat relatively decent sized meal in the morning, brunch and lunch, and then I've got sort of 7 hours until race time, I feel like I can digest everything feels great, stomach feels light, but I feel full of energy. And then in that evening, I'm literally just snacking on something like a granola bar, and then having maybe some Morton drink mix, some Morton 320 drink mix or similar from another brand. And then I feel absolutely on top of the world and I feel brilliant. That works for me, it doesn't work for everybody. So that's just an example of how over the years I've tried eating heavier in the evening, gone to a race and it's absolutely gone to pot, got stitch issues, it's been a nightmare. In terms of morning races, I tend to eat the night before up till about 6 o'clock, and then I don't tend to eat anything until the next morning. I let all that food that I ate at 6 o'clock digest, and then in the morning I can clear my system and then have a decent breakfast 3.5 hours before the race, and that tends to be what works for me. So it all comes down to experimentation, but it is so key to do that in these tune-up races. Tip number 4, leave good time for a warm-up. Don't be stressed, don't be rushing. Now, I actually failed on this on my most recent race, which was this week, because traffic was so bad. I really couldn't help that. I left in plenty of time to get there 50 minutes before the start of the race so I could go through the motions, and we'll talk about warm-up properly shortly. But in terms of just generic doing a warm-up, it's really important to get one done. I did manage to get one done, thankfully, but it wasn't as long as I'd have liked to. And what I find with the warm-up is it just helps your body get used to it. Actually, what it does is it gets your heart rate elevated, so it's not quite such a shock when you shoot off the line when the gun goes off. Again, not only that, but you're just priming the muscles for what's about to come. Just getting 10-15 minute light jogging can be great. Other people do other warm-ups. I've experimented with a multitude of warm-ups. I've experimented with sort of easy and then a bit of tempo and strides, which is kind of what I'm starting to do a little bit more now. Again, finding getting that heart rate up takes the shock away. So the race I've just done now, I didn't have the optimal warm-up, but because I did run a little bit faster in the warm-up, when I went off the line and we went off quite hot, the pace didn't feel that hot because my body was kind of ready for it and it felt really, really good. So there's a lot of things that we can do with warm-ups, and we can again all experiment. Some people just like to do a few minutes easy jog. Some people like to go through a whole 20-30 minute rigmarole. That's fine, we're all different. But the point is, warm-ups are key, because if you just don't do anything and you just walk to the start line and you go for it, you're just going to feel rather sluggish for the first 1 or 2 miles. And tip number 5, replicate what you do in training on that race night. So when we're talking about warm-ups and drills and strides and stuff, what do you do before your workouts? So for me, this is what I've learned over the years. Doing drills and strides before my workouts has been key to help improve my cadence, improve my turnover, improve my form. It improves everything really. And so what I'm trying to do, and my coach at the moment is trying to get me to do, and I've done it in the past as well, is effectively replicate what you do in training going into a workout. Because if we have a good workout in training and it goes well, and we look back at what warm-up we did, 15 minutes easy jog, some drills and strides, and then before we get into the workout, especially at the moment for me, I'm doing a little tempo chunk of work before I get into the main bulk of the intervals. Replicating that on the evening in a similar-ish manner can be a really beneficial thing. What you're doing in your mind is you're going, right, well, I'm just doing exactly what I've done in training. It keeps you calm. You know what you do in training week after week after week. So it helps keep the body calm, helps keep the mind calm, and it helps your body recognize what you're about to do. It kind of, builds patterns, muscle memory. We hear all about it. Do what you do in training, replicate it in a race, and again, your body's just going to feel like it's second nature. It's not going to be a shock to the system, like I've just talked about with getting the heart rate up there. And you're going to have a much stronger start rather than coming off the line feeling a little bit sluggish. And tip number 6, wear familiar kit and practice with that kit in training. So we talked about in the beginning, in the preparation phase, I said that, bad kit isn't always the worst thing in the world, but it is very, very frustrating. It does distract your mind. Bad shoes, you might get a blister, you might look at them and go, well, I'm never going to use those again, but nutrition is the main thing. Ultimately, what we don't want on race day is any of those distractions. I think kit and shoes are probably less of a priority than nutrition, in my opinion. Other people might think differently, because we can still get through a race, but what we don't want in race mode is being distracted by those things. So if we're practicing and we're prepared with the kit, with the shoes, then we're not going to have any issues in race day. So like socks, shoes, I've raced in shoes in different socks and got blisters, and I've raced in shoes with another pair of socks and been absolutely fine. Working out that combination, thin socks, thick socks, I know it sounds stupid, it makes a massive difference. And one of my recent races in Rosin a couple of weeks ago, I got a blister in a pair of shoes that I've run in a few times and never had a blister, but I wore really thin socks. So the next time I used them, it was all about using thicker socks. So it's one of those things where we have to experiment a little bit and we have to make sure we're comfortable with it. But taking those distractions away from us, like getting blisters, like getting chafing, wherever it might be, it can be very painful. It can take our mind away from the job, rather than just thinking to myself, right, settling into a rhythm, keep calm, this is what we want to do, one step in front of the other, this feels good. If we've got all those other things pinging off in our head, it's just going to completely distract from the goal at hand. And the final thing I want to talk about is pacing. Pacing is so key, and pacing can be the difference between a good race, a great race, or as I said, an absolute stinker. I think we've all heard a lot of the ways to pace, pretty much as a positive split, an even split, or a negative split. For those of you who aren't aware what those are, a positive split is where you go off really, really fast and try and hold on. Your time and pace gets slower towards the end, but you're basically just going out really hard and trying to hang on. An even split is where you try and cut even all the way through, so you try and run a very steady pace from start to finish. And And a negative split is where you might start off slightly slower but finish slightly faster. Now for me, I've basically run all of these things, and most recently in my last race I did a negative split, but in my race before that I did a positive split, and I've run a fair few even and negative splits. And what for me works often is a negative split or an even split race. I've never ever really had success with a positive split race. It hurts and it completely takes the enjoyment away from the race for me. Having said that, I've seen plenty of comments in a lot of my previous YouTube videos that you guys love to do positive splits because you go out there hard, you like to hold on, and it's that feeling of hurting and emptying the tank. I get it, I understand. It is a great feeling. For me though, what works is a negative split, starting off calmly, finishing strong, finishing hard, because I get that mental boost when I start to pass people in the end of a race. When I think I've got nothing in the tank, feeding off someone else's energy can really help me just kind of get that last percent out of myself, go past them, and it gives me that drive and motivation to keep going on. And even splitting, well, that tends to come from me thinking that this is the pace I want to run, and it's something that happens by chance sometimes, where I go, yeah, I actually can run that pace, and I get to the end. Or what happens is I might not be that fit, I try and run that pace, and I fade off because I'm not as fit as I think I am. So even split is not something I ever intentionally do. The one that I always try and do is a negative split, and it always seems to work out well for me. So there we go, a couple of elements there in the preparation phase, and then 5 tips for you guys during race day. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would of course love to hear from you guys what your tips are for anyone on race day. A lot of people say the phrase, don't try anything new. Totally agree with that, and that's where a lot of these tips have come from, practicing in training. I appreciate if you're a beginner runner, you haven't had time to practice, you might not have raced as much as I have and other people, so this is the time for you to look at what goal races you have and just book some local small tune-up races. That's your chance to practice, because obviously when you get to the big goal race, that's your time to shine. And I'd love you to shine at your goal races, as I'm sure everyone else around you, including yourself, would as well. So there we go, that's it from me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving it a like, share it with your friends, and of course subscribe to the channel for weekly running content. I'll see you in the next one. Until then.